All right. Well, it's 12:02, so we can get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Opportunities and Gaps for Agroforestry on the West Coast. This webinar is hosted by the California Agroforestry Network and San Diego State University. And we're so excited to have you all here. Today, we're going to be learning about a study led by Amy Quandt at San Diego State in partnership with many collaborators who are part of the California Agroforestry Network. We worked together on a survey of natural resource professionals that really dived into looking at the most urgent priorities, research gaps, and on-the-ground challenges influencing agroforestry adoption in Washington, Oregon, and California. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Catherine Favor. I'm the founding executive director of the California Agroforestry Network. We are a peer learning network dedicated to supporting agroforestry in California and the West Coast through coordinated research, education, and relationship building. Um, we are a network, so we're composed of hundreds of farmers, ranchers, researchers, nonprofits, government agencies, and pretty much anyone else who identifies as an agroforestry enthusiast. So we do a lot of different things, including we host webinars like this, we put on in-person trainings, we do a lot of joint research projects, and we also just get together every other month virtually to talk about all things agroforestry in California. There are a lot of different ways to tap into our network. So if you're not already a part of it, I'm going to put a link in the chat later where you can sign up. But just a bit of housekeeping before we get started with this webinar. If everyone could just please keep your microphones muted during the presentation, that would be great. We will have plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. So if you do have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat at any point. I will read them off at the end. And then also at the end, we'll have time. You can come on camera and come off mute, and we can sort of have a discussion and talk through a lot of the ideas that are brought up. As we're all trickling in here, we'd also love to get to know you. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Just write down your name, where you're based, and a little bit about the work that you do or what makes you excited about agroforestry. Um, so with that, I think there are enough of us here that we can get started. So I will introduce Amy again. Today's webinar is hosted by San Diego State and the California Agroforestry Network. Dr. Amy Quandt will be presenting today. Amy is an associate professor at San Diego State University. She's also the board chair of the California Agroforestry Network. She's an environmental social scientist whose research centers around how agroforestry is being used by farmers for climate adaptation. Much of her work has been focused on East Africa and also California, and she has experience collaborating with organizations from the World Agroforestry Center, the Red Cross, the Nature Conservancy, and many others. She also served as a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Tanzania. Um, and as I said, now she is the chair of the California Agroforestry Network. In addition to all of that, Amy also leads the research team of the California Agroforestry Network, which is a collaborative branch of our network that convenes researchers throughout the country, many of whom are with us today in this room. Um, and so, again, today, Amy will be talking about the results of a collaborative study that she led in partnership with dozens of partners across the West Coast and beyond to explore some of the needs and gaps surrounding agroforestry here on the West Coast. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Amy. Thank you, Amy.
Great, thank you. My internet just dropped out for a second, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. But thank you for the introduction. I don't have a whole lot to say because you already said it all, but I'm very happy to be here presenting from San Diego State. Also been working with Catherine on the California Agroforestry Network for now over 2 years, maybe closer to three at this point. And really happy to present kind of our team's first research efforts as part of the California Agroforestry Network, with a ton of different collaborators that I will get into. So just a little overview. I do want to acknowledge all the folks that have worked on this project and all the different collaborations, as well as provide a little more background into the California Agroforestry Network if this is your first time attending any of our meetings or webinars. Then I'll go into the motivations for our study. And if you are kind of newer to agroforestry, I will just step back for a second and talk about what agroforestry is and some of the agroforestry practices that we focused on for this work. And then go into methods and results. So talk about who took the survey, kind of the research side of the results as far as what were some of the most urgent and relevant research topics in the region. And then more of the implementation side of things as far as what are some of the resource and information needs that natural resource professionals identified to help them promote agroforestry adoption, and with some key takeaways. And then I have some discussion points at the end. I will certainly not be talking for an entire hour, so I'm happy to open this up for discussion. We have a ton of amazing people in this room with a really wide range of knowledge on agroforestry, so hoping this can also be somewhat of a discussion as well. Awesome, yes. And please do keep introducing yourself in the chat. This is great. I love to see who is here and all the different expertise that we have. These are all the amazing organizations that help with this project. And I do really need to particularly point out that I was able to fund 6 undergraduate students at San Diego State University through a USDA Next Gen grant to do a lot of this work. So I've been working with those 6 students since February to analyze the data from the survey and put together a lot of the different graphs and things that you'll see today. So I really need to thank them. We've been meeting every week. They've been working really hard on this. And as an educator, I do think it's really important to include students in everything that I do. All right, so just a quick intro to the California Agroforestry Network. If you're new, I know Catherine already did somewhat of an introduction, but as she mentioned, we are all people interested in agroforestry throughout California, and certainly have members of our group that are outside California as well. Started as a peer learning network dedicated to advancing agroforestry adoption, and we do this through a few different work streams, which I'll go into. We have bi-monthly meetings, and then we do have quarterly meetings for some of our working groups as well, and I'll encourage you to get involved in all of that. So here's kind of the 4 major things that we do. So partner communication and coordination was kind of the original mission as far as just getting agroforestry folks talking to each other. I know when I first started doing agroforestry research in California, I thought I was alone. And it turns out that I'm not. And it's good to know that. And I think this is a really important component that some of these networks can play as far as introducing folks to each other. Because we can do more good if we work together, right? The next kind of piece of work that we do is research. So the survey presented today is the first effort from the California Agroforestry Network focused on research. So we will see what that is. We have education and outreach, so through trainings, train the trainer, webinars like this, field days. We've already done several trainings for NRCS employees specifically. So we've done one online training and then an in-person training last 2 weeks ago that Catherine put together for Southern California and San Diego. And certainly more to come on that field, as well as demonstration sites. Working on expanding the network of example agroforestry demonstration sites. As you'll see in the survey, demonstration sites came up as a really big need for things that we need more of. And we've also been working on virtual demonstration sites as well. It can be hard to travel and get funding for all of that. So if you can be on your computer but drop into a farm, see the different agroforestry practices and hear from the farmers, that can also be really, really helpful. So just briefly, California Agroforestry Network. For those who are newer to agroforestry, it can be a little bit difficult to understand because agroforestry looks really different and can include a lot of different agricultural practices. I have these 2 definitions here. So the first is agroforestry is the intentional combination of agriculture and forestry to create productive and sustainable land use practices. How I like to think of agroforestry is kind of the combination of trees, crops, or livestock on the same farm, on the same management unit. So that could be trees and crops, trees and livestock, or all 3. A few key features of agroforestry that make it different from like monoculture agriculture is it does generally include more than one crop at a time. So as you can tell if you're combining trees with crops or trees with livestock, you're producing more than one different type of product on the same piece of land at the same time. And one crop is a perennial, a tree, a shrub, a vine. It can produce multiple outputs in addition to food, things like fodder for livestock, fuel, timber through the wood products that trees can provide also. Agroforestry systems are generally more complex, right? Because you're combining multiple things on the landscape. So some of them, sometimes they often mimic more so natural ecosystems than other types of agriculture. And because of the different types of crops that you're including, it's often is multi-story. So you might have tall tree crops, kind of middle range crops, and then field crops as well. So this is why agroforestry can be confusing because it includes so many different types of practices. As far as kind of the six that are the focus of USDA efforts, I'm going to just briefly go through what the kind of the six major agroforestry practices are in the US, and I have some pictures here. So we have alley cropping, which is pretty self-explanatory. You have alleys of trees or shrubs, and then other crops that are planted in rows between those trees and shrubs. Forest farming is growing or foraging crops under a managed tree canopy. So farming under the forest, if you think forest farming. Silvopasture specifically combines trees with livestock. There's a lot of areas in California where grazing is done under trees. That's silvopasture. The other three kind of major agroforestry practices include riparian forest buffers. So these might be natural or planted trees along bodies of water. So this can help protect water quality and protect those waterways in agricultural areas, as well as provide benefits to wildlife. Other things, we have windbreaks. So this is linear plantings of trees to help protect crops from winds, but not only wind, it could be snow, dust, odors, other things to just help shelter crops or animals from the elements, basically. And then we have hedgerows, which can be similar to some of these practices. These are usually dense vegetations, often done in lines, similar to windbreaks, generally more for a conservation purpose. So this could be habitat. It also is often used to help bring in beneficial insects or pollinators. And these are kind of the six most recognized agroforestry practices by the USDA and in the US. So that's my kind of broad intro as far as how common is agroforestry across the US. This map is from the 2022 Census of Agriculture, which shows that there's almost 33,000 farms across the US practicing at least one form of agroforestry, which is almost double the number that are practicing organic, so more than organic farms. But if you do the math, this is only about 1.7% of all farms reporting at least one agroforestry practice. And this is a huge motivation of this work as far as it's great that agroforestry is happening across the US, but that number could be a lot higher. And how can we, address some of the gaps as far as promoting agroforestry adoption? So yeah, that's like I mentioned, those are some of the methods, or some of the motivations, sorry. A lot of agroforestry research has taken place outside of the US and definitely outside of the West Coast. There's less focused here, and a lot of the main agroforestry institutions in the US are not on the West Coast. As I mentioned, 1.7% of farms nationally, and then I have the breakdown here as far as the three states. So California is below average, below that 1.7%. Oregon and Washington are a bit higher, but still 4%, 3.5%, right? There's a lot of room to grow those numbers. So this really motivates this research as far as how can we increase adoption, given a lot of the things we know about the benefits, the environmental and socioeconomic benefits of agroforestry. So for this research, we focused on natural resource professionals. We didn't start with the farmers themselves and instead decided to start with the folks that are working with farmers. So these natural resource professionals are the folks that connect farmers to resources, to funding, to knowledge, and that's why we thought it was an important group to start with. So this includes a pretty broad spectrum of folks, including extension, consulting, government. You'll see the breakdown of who actually took the survey later, and it's pretty representative of all these groups as far as focusing on, the natural resource professionals that are working with farmers. So they're hearing the farmers' challenges, they're hearing what they need to know more about, as well as what they need to know more about to train farmers themselves. For the methods, we did an online survey. We ended up with 114 natural resource professionals responding to our survey throughout the three states. Um, all of the collaborators as part of this project disseminated the survey link throughout all of our networks. We have a spreadsheet keeping track of all of that. I think it was something like 25 different organizations, institutions, listservs we reached out to for the survey. And the survey was open last fall and winter for folks to take. We kept it open for quite a long time because if you remember last fall, there were a lot of federal employees not working for a few months. So we kept it open extra long just to make sure everyone had a chance to take it. And as I mentioned, the questions focused on kind of the research needs, but also some of the adoption barriers and resource needs that natural resource professionals face in their day-to-day jobs as well. All right, so getting into some of the results. These are some of the results as far as where our survey respondents work. Pretty evenly split throughout Oregon, California, and Washington. There were some folks that answered all that work in all of the states, and some folks that said Washington and Oregon. You can see here, these are the maps of the three states with all the counties that are colored in or where a respondent works. And I was really impressed by this actually. We got a pretty nice geographic distribution of respondents. The counties that actually have the names written in had 5 or more respondents from those counties. And, if you know the West Coast, this shouldn't be a huge surprise that most of the respondents are on the western sides of the states. That's where a lot of the agriculture is, and the eastern sides of the states tend to be a little more drier in some places, right? So this was nice to see a pretty broad geographic distribution among our survey respondents. What type of agency do you work for? This was also a nice representation. A ton of folks from federal agencies. We also have state agencies, county or local agencies represented. So a lot of government employees that are working with farmers. A nice representation of nonprofit organizations, also for-profit businesses as well as a good chunk of folks like myself who are university or educational organizations. And then some folks said other. I don't fit into those boxes, which is also fine. So you can see we have a nice variety of folks. So this is really important with survey work to make sure that you're getting kind of a broad spectrum of opinions. We also asked folks to describe their role at their job as far as what kind of the main thing that they're doing. And people could select more than one because a lot of us do a lot of things. Technical assistance was the top answer there, which is our target audience, right, for the survey. So that's great. So these are the folks that are going out and providing technical assistance to farmers on the ground. We also had a good chunk of survey respondents that work in education, planning, consulting, research, fewer in policy development, and practitioners, because that wasn't our main target audience. But definitely a nice variety of different types of roles as well. All right, as far as digging into some of the more agroforestry focused results here, we did ask on the survey, what are some of the most common agroforestry practices that you're seeing? It's important to know these are just from the respondents' opinions. We didn't go out and actually document this by any means, but as far as what our survey respondents are seeing on the ground, we asked them to take the 6 practices and rank them from 1 being most common to 6 being least common. And you can see all 6 of these practices got a 1 from at least a person or 2 and a 6 from at least a person or 2. But the most common practices were riparian forest buffers, hedgerows, and silvopasture, with the least most talked about ones being alley cropping and forest farming. We did look at this on a state by state basis because the West Coast is obviously so geographically different. And it did vary a little bit state by state. This might be a little bit of a busy slide, but basically on the left, you have the most common agroforestry practices, and on the right, the less common agroforestry practices. And then this is like you would see it on a map. Oregon, you have Washington on top, Oregon in the middle, and then California on the bottom. So especially with California, there were some differences. The most common agroforestry practice reported in California was hedgerows, followed by windbreaks, and then forest farming. Well, really for all three states, forest farming and alley cropping were the two less common or the two least common ones mentioned. Um, this is interesting in of itself to me, and I wonder why that is. If people just are less familiar with these practices, they're less promoted or maybe less suitable in the region. That's something to think and talk about more. And then in Oregon and Washington, both had riparian forest buffers being the most common practice. Hedgerows being next in Washington, and then silvopasture being next in Oregon. So there's some differences between the different types of agroforestry practices in these states. And obviously each state is also huge and has different practices throughout. So it's just a general overview of what are people seeing on the ground as far as what practices are farmers practicing. All right, so I'll explain this. There's a lot of beautiful colors in this. So as far as the research side of things go, we developed as a team kind of 11 topics that we thought were important to agroforestry and to agroforestry on the West Coast. You can see that list there on the y-axis, and I'll go through what some of these mean here in a second. But we asked in the survey for folks to rank these 1 through 11, so to put them in order based on their opinion of what's the most urgent. So the first question we asked was most urgent for agricultural forestry systems where you work. And we defined urgent as the topic that needs to be dealt with or happen immediately. So what research do we need to happen now? What topics do we need to know about now if we want to promote agroforestry adoption? And you can see here there was also a huge diversity of answers. Each of these topics got at least a 1 ranking from someone and at least an 11 ranking from someone. But generally, the most highest ranked topics were suitable practices, climate change adaptation, and agroforestry economy. And you'll see these 3 things come up throughout the survey results. For suitable practices, what we meant by that was agroforestry practices suitable to the West Coast unique climate regions. The West Coast is different from the rest of the US. We have a ton of diversity among the West Coast, obviously, but we have Mediterranean climates, we have some drier land climates, rainforests, other things that maybe are less common or don't exist in other parts of the United States. So what are suitable practices around the West Coast? Interestingly, climate change adaptation came up as this is a main topic of a lot of my other research projects. I was happy, maybe not happy to see this, but interested to see this. So folks, how we phrased climate change adaptation was how can agroforestry systems help farmers adapt to climate change in the region? So, you know, even with whatever's going on politically, right? Farmers on the ground and natural resource professionals still wanted to know about agroforestry and climate change adaptation. So thinking 10, 20 years down the line, how can agroforestry help adapt their farms to increased heat, to increased rain, to some of the things that farmers have already been experiencing and will continue to experience in the future? And then really importantly, agroforestry economy was one in the top 3. So how can agroforestry contribute more to farm income? And this question came up throughout the survey. How can we make agroforestry profitable, right? At the end of the day, farms are a business, and you know, for a business to thrive, it needs to be profitable. So how can we do that? So these were the top 3 topics as far as most urgent, most timely, things we need to know more about now. The next question that we asked was the same 11 topics, but now we wanted to know what was most relevant. So by relevant, we define that as valuable and useful to people in their lives and work. So urgent was more about timely. This is more about what is valuable. What do people really need to know in order to make agroforestry work in the long term? Um, Similar to the last one, a lot of different opinions as far as what was ranked one, what was ranked 11, but the same top three topics emerged for this question as well, just in a slightly different order. So agroforestry economy kind of jumped up to most relevant. How can we make agroforestry work financially for farmers? Suitable practices was then number two. And climate change adaptation was number three. And as I mentioned, these three themes really resonated throughout the entire survey. So you'll see them come up again as I keep presenting survey results. So we also in our survey had an open-ended question where we just asked the survey response, we just asked folks, what questions do you hear from farmers? What questions do they have for you about agroforestry? And these we grouped into three different categories. So general questions, questions that are kind of more practice specific, and then once again, economic questions. So the general questions were really broad from the very basic question, what is agroforestry? How do you start? Is it viable? Will climate change affect it? I know I've certainly had conversations with farmers in San Diego that are practicing agroforestry, but have never heard that term. So that is a question as far as what is agroforestry, right? People might not know what that means, even if they're already doing it. Um, how do you start? Is it viable? Agroforestry involves perennial crops, so you really need to make sure that you are, planning things out effectively, which also deals with the practices questions. What tree should I use? What species do I select? How do I mitigate pests? It's nice to have a plan in place ahead of time before you invest 10 years into planting trees, just to kind of see how it goes. So these were very common questions that came up throughout this open-ended aspect of the research. And then, as I mentioned, once again, economics, or are there grants to get started? What are the potential markets? What's the return on investment? These are also common questions with, a crop that takes years to get a return on investment on. Is it worth it financially? All right, so now kind of switching more towards the resource needs and training needs of natural resource professionals, we asked several questions related to this. So this question was, do you feel like you have adequate training and resources about agroforestry specifically? And here I have this broken down by the total and then also by state, although the results are fairly similar. And this was a question where folks could, strongly agree, um, strongly disagree, agree, or neither, right? So kind of somewhere on the spectrum. And from all of the three different states or the total, there was a pretty wide spread of natural resource professionals that strongly agreed, yes, we have adequate training and resources. But on the same side, you have another about half of the respondents that said, no, I disagree, or I strongly disagree. I don't have enough training or resources. So I think this shows some what of a disparate access to training and resources. Some people feel confident, other people's really don't. So improving, these numbers to make everyone feel a little more confident about having adequate training and resources would be critical to help with agroforestry adoption. We then asked a little bit more specifically about what do you actually need? What kinds of training and resources would be helpful? So what do you need to better serve your practitioners? This was a select all question. Folks could select any of these that they wanted to, as well as put in another category. And demonstration sites, as I alluded to earlier, was the top most mentioned thing. Folks wanted to see more demonstration sites. I think, seeing is believing, and seeing a viable, profitable farm in person is a huge, valuable resource. So that was a main thing that folks talked about, as well as field days. That can be combined, right? Taking a field day to see different demonstration sites, training materials for me to train others. So this is natural resource professionals wanting more training materials to help them train others. Funding was number four. That kind of surprised me. I thought that might be higher. Funding's always a concern. And it did show up, on the top of this list, but it wasn't number one. Um, Awareness and buy-in from government agencies, especially since a lot of our survey respondents work for the government. I think they wanted more buy-in from from the agencies they work for to help promote agroforestry adoptions and training. Um, Training materials for me, trainings for me, improved markets for agroforestry products, networking, academic research, and so forth. So this was kind of the last question we asked in the survey as far as what are the biggest constraints to adoption of agroforestry in your area. And the top two answers were economic barriers. So the economic theme comes up again as far as initial costs, delayed uncertain returns, uncertainty about markets for agroforestry products, and then knowledge and technical barriers came up a lot as well. People need to know more. They want to know more about agroforestry, demonstration sites, field days. These are, we saw a lot of synergy throughout the survey responses. There were some social cultural barriers, labor and labor availability, water-related barriers. This is a little surprising coming from Southern California that that wasn't higher because water is a huge issue here, but generally it was lower on the list. And also surprisingly, policy and legislative barriers was also somewhat lower. And to me, that's great news because a lot of the farmers I interview in California, at least, talk a lot about regulations and how regulations can hinder their practices. And that doesn't seem to be the case with agroforestry adoption, which is great news. All right, to make sure I get through this before my internet cuts off again. So just some of the key takeaways from the survey. We did analyze all of these questions on a state-by-state basis. I didn't show all those results because they weren't super interesting, to be honest. A lot of the agroforestry priorities and resource needs were fairly similar. My apologies. Back again. Okay, a lot of the priorities and needs were similar across the states. Money does matter, right? Producers need to see that agroforestry can be profitable. Those themes came up again and again. And also money matters as far as funding for field visits, demonstration sites, training materials. While funding was number four on the list of needs, a lot of funding can be needed to support the other things that were higher up on the list, like demonstration sites and field visits. Um, this kind of region-specific agroforestry practices and needing to know what's suitable for different agroecosystems came up throughout as well. And this is something that's really difficult because the West Coast is different from the rest of the United States, but also really diverse within our different states, right? We have all the different types of ecosystems, basically. So what practices are most well suited to the different agroecosystems? And then kind of surprisingly, climate change considerations came up throughout as far as how can agroforestry help farmers adapt to climate change, but also how might trees be impacted by climate change, right? Those two different sides of things. Lastly, just a few discussion questions before I open it up for questions and discussion. How can we leverage our combined resources for things like field days, training materials, demonstration sites? We have an amazing group of people on this webinar, and we don't need to be working in isolation, right? We need to be working together to help with agroforestry adoption. So how can we leverage our combined resources? What resources exist locally about regionally suitable practices? I know a lot of different folks are working on different manuals for different parts of the West Coast. So I just have a bullet point here to drop this in the chat, right? What resources do you know about that can help guide people towards more like locally relevant agroforestry practices or regionally suitable agroforestry practices? And then how else can we increase agroforestry adoption in our region? Kind of going back to the 2022 USDA census results, how else can we get these numbers to be higher? And with that, I will stop in case my internet cuts out again. Thank you. One last thing I think Catherine, I had a hard time following the results, but might have put some of these links, but I did want to include links for some of the major nonprofit organizations that have been a part of this, the California Agroforestry Network, Indigenous Agroforestry Network, Agroforestry Northwest, and the Pacific Agroforestry Working Group. If you're not involved in one or all of these groups, you should be. They all have meetings, webinars. It's a a way to really collaborate and network beyond kind of our individual silos and individual positions. So I have the links up there. You can certainly also find web pages for all of these as well. And with that, have my email. Feel free to contact me with any questions or thoughts, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen in case it cuts out again, and open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was so informative. What a great study and what a great presentation. We do have a few questions in the chat, so I can read those off. And if anyone else has other questions, please put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and you can come on camera and you can ask. Either way works great. With that, I know we're at the top of the hour, so I think we'll have to close for the day. But it's been so great to see so many amazing questions and to have such a great discussion. I want to say a huge thank you to Amy. That was such an informative presentation. And thank you for leading this research and for leading a team of so many incredible collaborators who came together to make this happen. Huge thank you. And I do hope to see all of you in an upcoming California Agroforestry Network meeting. We have our next general meeting on Thursday, June 4th at 12 p.m. At everyone's lunch hour if you're on the Pacific Coast. Hope to see you all there, or if not, virtually on our listserv. We would love to continue the conversation. So thank you to everyone. And yeah, with that, we can close.
Thank you, Catherine, for helping to organize.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.